Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to this month's wellness webinar. As many of you know, this is our third or fourth month of doing the wellness webinar series here at ZYTO, and so we're very excited and pleased to be here with you today. If this is your first time coming, we welcome you. We hope that this is an enjoyable experience. We hope it's a great opportunity to learn and further develop and understand things in different lights. If this is your second or third time, we welcome you back. We hope that this is turned into something that you look forward to. We've had a ton of feedback from customers and people that are incredibly interested in what we're producing and putting together and organizing. This webinar series is incredibly important to us. We view it as a great opportunity to come together as a community to share insights and information. We have a global community that come from many different backgrounds and understandings and professions. And we believe that coming together in this webinar series is a great opportunity to share those perspectives. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jeff Crabb. I'm the Director of Marketing here at ZYTO. And what ZYTO is an insights platform that practitioners and business builders all around the world use to help gain insights into wellness. As you'll see here, ZYTO has a hand cradle, which many people have. If you're a customer, you have this. It's very familiar. It's very iconic to our brand. The hand cradle is a Class 2 registered medical device with the FDA here in the United States. It does not cure, diagnose, or treat ailments or illnesses, but rather provides insights to you, the practitioner, that will allow you to further help and assist others in their journey to wellness. Today, we have kind of just a couple of things that I'd like to bring up. Many of you have probably heard about our global conference that we're going to be having this year. It's happening October 19th and 20th in Salt Lake City, Utah. The theme of this event is Discovering Wellness with You. We view this community as so valuable, and we're so blessed to be a part of it. And so we want to come together. We use these webinar series as kind of these smaller events that we can have come together and discuss these things. But ultimately, it will build up to this larger event that will happen in October, where we can come together as over 400 people will be in attendance. You can meet vendors, you can meet speakers. We're going to have great speakers. Dr. Cook, the CEO and founder of ZYTO, will be the first keynote speaker at this event. It's just a great opportunity. We had it about 4 or 5 years ago, and the feedback that we've gotten ever since hosting that originally has just been through the roof, phenomenal. And people have requested time and time again, when are you going to have that annual conference again? And so we are so pleased to be able to bring that back to the community again this year. So let me, without kind of further ado, let me introduce our speaker today, Leonie Baxter. Leonie is actually from the UK, London area, just outside of it, and she is a phenomenal person. We're so grateful. We've had the pleasure, at least me personally, I've had the pleasure of knowing Leonie for a couple of years now. She has a great, fun personality to be around, but beyond that, she has a ton of experience in this field of holistic medicine and this holistic approach to health and wellness. She has a diploma in nutrition, advanced clinical herbal medicine, the health psychology. She has set up a couple of different practices, one in Hampshire, England, the other in Marble Arch, just near central London. And so we're just so pleased and blessed to have her here with us today. She's going to be presenting on exploring the interplay of energy, emotion, form, function, and digestion. And I think that we're all just looking forward to it. I know we have a ton of people already here on the live broadcast today, but Leonie, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So yeah, I hope I can give you guys an interesting, explorative and entertaining view, looking at the interplay of energy, emotion, function and form with some focus on digestion, because that's kind of where it all begins and ends, really. And
totally.
I think a lot of practitioners at the moment are very interested in this area, particularly if you a penchant towards nutrition, because digestion is really where everything begins, and we'll go on and take a look at that.
Leonie, can you tell us a little bit, maybe more, just expound a little bit more about you? Tell us a little bit about, who you are beyond a practitioner, what brought you into this industry in the first place, what interests you in what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, well, I've always had a very inquiring mind. So I studied psychology years ago, and that took me into the pharmaceutical industry, where I then studied some pharmacy. And I worked there on working with sort of training some of the doctors and things on clinical trials. But I always kind of thought it was a very one-dimensional view, and that there was a lot more going on, and I had a natural interest and passion for herbal medicine and nutrition, and so I went on to study those things and began my own practice. I then later on did a master's degree in health psychology, and so my practice was basically the interplay of all those different areas. And then probably back in 2008 I became more interested in sort of energy medicine and some of the Chinese perspectives, although I didn't go down that route so much, but homeopathy and some of the biocommunication scanning systems I started to find an interest in. And I worked with some of those and within some really great practices with some amazing practitioners. And it just kind of went from there, really.
And remind me, when did you first get to know ZYTO?
So I first found ZYTO in 2014, and I've been working with ZYTO ever since.
Okay, that's great. And I do want to make mention before we kind of head off down the path, and I'll turn the time fully over to Leonie for this presentation. Please, if you're a live attendee, we have on the right side, I believe, of this GoToWebinar link that you have, there's an area where you can open up a ask question box or a question box. Please submit those questions throughout the broadcast. We're going to be interjecting questions back to Leonie, and she'll be happy to answer any of those. Towards the end, we'll have time for just a couple more as well. So please take advantage of that. We're going to be filtering as many questions in throughout this presentation as possible, but make sure that you're utilizing that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of sit back and enjoy this presentation just like everyone else. And thank you again, Leonie, for being here.
Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. So I've always been fascinated in the interplay between energy and motion and how energy creates form and function. So we're going to take a look at energy and matter origins, because that's kind of where it all began. We're going to take a look at function and emotion, some energy physiology and elements of digestion, because as I said, that's where it all really begins. And then a last little look at some energy physiology and psycho-spiritual maturation, which is where today's giveaway comes from, because in my practice, I've always used a splicing and an interplay of all of those key themes. So first of all, we're going to look at our energy origins, because essentially it all started with Big Bang. And so about 15 to 20 billion years ago, the universe arose with a cataclysmic explosion, fusing subatomic particles together, creating some of our basic elements like hydrogen and helium, and galaxies were formed, and thus were produced all of the chemical elements found both on Earth, within our plant systems, and more importantly, within us today. Now, anybody who studied biochemistry and on an academic level will know that biochemistry asks how all of that interplays together. How do we make sense of that? And so it all begins essentially with energy. Everything begins really small. So the most minute particles that happen from Big Bang really are our gluons, our quarks, which you guys may have heard of. You may have heard of the Hadron Collider and CERN, where they're working with finding antimatter and experimenting with it. But basically, we all begin with energy. Matter is made of energy. So it starts off really small with color charges. And we essentially rotate polarized light, and that's what we are in our very smallest form. So all of our molecules, all of our the atoms that make our molecules are essentially rotating polarized light. And let's just take a little better look at that. So we can see that quarks and gluons, they hold a color charge, so they are essentially light energy and magnetism. And so what these do is they bunch together through gravity, force, sound vibration and light, and they group together to make atoms. Or they start off with electrons, neutrons and protons, and the electrons, neutrons and electrons, neutrons and protons make atoms, which make molecules, which make cells. And so all these essential elements of energy group together to make physical form, and the physical form that we know and recognize. So we all know pretty much what a molecule looks like, what an organelle in a cell looks like, what cells and tissues look like, and we know that tissues make organ systems. We know that they make muscle, bone, the central nervous system, and eventually the human bioenergy organism. Now, the nature of molecules is determined by how many electrons they contain in their outer shell. So again, it comes back to energy. So groups of energy create different elements. And that's kind of important as we go on to look how energy is shared in the body. And we'll go on and look at that a bit later. So we can also take a look at the effect of energy or matter. So how does energy from the environment interplay with matter in our body, with the functioning in our body, with the biochemistry that we need to move through life and to grow and develop? And there are a number of different really good examples. One we can take a look at is, for instance, with the eye, and we can see the cones and the rods. So these are the cells of the eye, and we know that photon energy, photonic energy that comes from the sun, it takes so many million years to come out of the sun. It shoots through the universe to planet Earth in about 8 minutes or something like that. And then from there, the photonic energy goes in through our eye, through the lens, through the optic nerve, obviously through the cells, and then it shoots through the pineal and the pituitary, comes up to the frontal lobes, where it starts to be convert into more of a functioning role. So those photons that can elicit emotional energy. So for instance, if we learn throughout our life word patterns, which are forms of photons associated with word patterns. We learn what images mean. We learn the emotional energy from images, and all of that goes through this line of processing. And what happens is that we have the release of, from this photonic energy working through our cells and through our brain, we have signal waves along axons and neurons, and neurotransmitters are released. Uptake occurs by receptors, and this goes on in a great long chain, a neuropeptide chain. So thoughts happen and emotions occur just simply from the perception of reading material and from that photonic energy. If we look again at more of how a nerve impulse transmits, we can see a very good example with neuropeptides and with a synapse. So everyone's probably seen a synapse. We know that the nerve impulse occurs. So again, if we think of the photon moving through the eye and the structure of the eye and the cellular structure of the optic nerve through the pineal, the pituitary, and out into the frontal lobes, we know at this point then that we've had transmission through our synapses to make that happen. The nerve impulse occurs, and this occurs through each of the synapses. This opens the calcium channel, and the calcium binds and attaches to the synaptic vesicles here. And then we get release of the neurotransmitter into the cavity between into the synaptic cleft between the two neurons. And we know that as sodium enters the channel, that the neuron transmits a charge across this space. We have here ligand-gated channels, and these are in all of our cells. They make up part of our phospholipid membrane of our cells. And so these are very important because we know here that we need calcium, we need sodium to get this transmission happening. But with ligand-gated channels, what can happen is that we can get toxic influences from our environment that mimic the energy and the molecules that we need, and they can make these ligand-gated channels very sloppy. They can make these receptor sites lazy and sloppy over time, for want of better words, and this has an effect on our functioning. So a typical manifestation of this may be where we are exposed to pesticides, insecticides, too many antibiotics, too much electromagnetic frequency, pharmaceutical products possibly that have long half-lives and very difficult to get rid of out of our body, any synthetic compound that leaves behind free radicals in our body. And so what they can do is make these receptor sites quite sloppy, and that can have a profound effect on our wellness. A typical example of this would be, for instance, with the neurons would be maybe something like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, but there are other examples.
I think that just speaks, Leonie, of that we're ultimately a product of the environment in which we put ourselves. So it's really being more aware of what we're allowing our body to be exposed to, what our intake looks like, how we're positioning ourselves within this world, because ultimately it all impacts different elements of our body and ultimately the wellness of the body, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it, Jeff. And I expect a lot of the practitioner audience here are very aware of some of those epigenetic factors. We call it epigenetics because it's outside of genetics. We know that probably 50% of any wellness picture or disease is about genetics, and the other 50 is about epigenetics. So we do have ultimately great power to affect our health and our wellness, and that's a really positive thing.
I love that perspective. I love that. We are in control of that, right?
Yes, exactly. So looking at now building blocks of neurotransmitters. So we took a look earlier at how atoms make molecules, make cells. We can see here that with the structures of our neurotransmitters, which govern concentration or pleasure or memory or learning or have calming or frightening effects in our body, you know, all for very good reasons often, we know that, well, we can see that they're actually made up again of these energy fundamental building blocks. So we have oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen atoms, and these are fundamental building blocks of our neurotransmitters or neuropeptides, which are basically chain proteins. They're bits of molecules stuck together, all made up of amino acids. Now, neurotransmitters are produced mostly in the gut, and there's some really good research coming out of Dr. Zach Bush's research center in the States. The name escapes me, I'm sorry, I can always get back to people with that. But so what they found is a number of trials have shown that about 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. The gut lining is huge. It's about 2 tennis courts. So, you know, the gut line is absolutely huge. And the reason it's huge is because it has all these tiny villi. So all these little sections here with the villi on, which are the tiny hairs in here that track your food and start to bring it in down to the membrane, into the microbiome that sits all along this lining here. And so the gut lining is made of about 13 amino acids that make a very tightly knit peptide chain. This same peptide chain knits together the very inner lining of your vascular system. So all the microvessels in your vein and the vasculature of your brain, also the vasculature of your kidneys, your eyes, and it's a very, very strong, this is where the blood-brain barrier is. So the blood-brain barrier isn't some kind of like terrain that is, you know, a blocked area that blocks off the brain from any blood, because the brain, you know, the brain needs a lot of nutrients and that comes from blood. But what the brain blood-brain barrier is, this tight 13 amino acid group of peptides, and it holds those really tightly together so that certain proteins can't get through, and we don't want, for instance, toxin proteins to get through, or toxin amino acids to get through those very tight-knit peptide chain membranes. They're extremely important, and they are what define us from the outer world. So it's amazing that we share our outer world, so everything we eat, what we touch, comes into our bodies and sits in our gut membrane, and it is our link with the outer world. It's what helps us survive, and we acquire this over a long time. So we get it both from our mothers when we're born, and we take a gulp of the vaginal secretions. and we get it from also our environment as we eat the food local to our environment, and that builds our microbiome. And it's really, really important. There's some really great, a really great couple of books out by a guy called Stephen Harabuna, and he's written all about why lime and why limes has species jumped, because we don't eat from our own environment, and we're moving too much into animals' environment. So there's some really interesting reading there, but I digress. So on the surface of this tightly knit peptide chain membrane, we have the microbiome, and the microbiome is just absolutely key, because it, along with our digestive enzymes and their effects at cleaving open our amino acids from our foods, our fats from our foods, our essential fatty acids, our vital amines or vitamins, and we'll go on and look at those a bit later, all of that groups together, and there's a type of crosstalk that activates immune effectors. So there's immune language going on, there's immune activation and attenuation, there's nervous messaging going on, and as I said, about 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, and about 50% of dopamine. Quite a lot of the rest of the dopamine is made in the kidney, but that's a bit of a different subject. But basically, our microbiome, our strong peptide chain, protects us and nourishes us, and it allows us to extract goodness from our world, from what we eat, and take into our bodies. So if we take a bit of a closer look at peptide messaging and gut physiology, we can see that there are actually very specific, there's some research done that you can find on actually the government medical website in the UK. I can't remember the name of the doctor, I should probably have it down here, but basically there's a study that's now isolated certain genuses in the microbiome that actually produce the different neurotransmitters, and these are absolutely critical and key. And so it's really important that we know that, and we keep our microbiome in a good state of health, because it's what really builds our emotional health and our energetic health in many ways. So you'll see here that serotonin is built from the Candida, Enterococcus and Escherichia species, obviously the friendly versions, that members of the Escherichia, Bacillus, Saccharomyces, etc. generate dopamine, and members of Lactobacillus produce acetylcholine, and so on. So it's very, crucial and key that we keep our gut microbiome in a good state of order.
Now, Leonie, what was the name of that?
Sorry, go on.
I just had a quick question. What was the name of that book that you mentioned about microbiome? There's several clinical papers that I could recommend, but I'll have to let you know those at the end, because I don't. And maybe what we can do is, if you have additional resources like that, just for the people viewing, is we can distribute that along with this webinar afterwards. So any of that information that we're missing within, we can send that out afterwards. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So one of the most devastating impacts on our emotional health, and there's a lot of research to show that depression's on the increase, and obviously degenerative diseases are, but it's because you see our neurotransmitters, the seat of our neurotransmitter health and formulation sits in the gut, and our gut has sadly been prone to a bit of antibiotic and microbial attack over the last sort of 20 to 30 years, as items like the glyphosate organophosphate groups have been sprayed across crops. And so all genetically modified crops have this sprayed on them, and whilst it may yield a good crop or a very high yield crop, there's a couple of things to consider, and one is that that growth is sped up, and so the alkaloids, the phenolics, the sugar groups, the carbohydrate groups in the plant are not the same as if we allowed them to mature. And with a certain amount of maturation, there's a small amount of fermentation that is actually, fermented products are actually quite good for our gut, and there's a whole load of research around this stuff. This is just a real introduction, but just to give you a good idea about what's been going on. And it's, you know, not to get down on farming, commercial farming or anything like that at all, but it's just good to be aware of the sorts of chemistry that's happening in our plants and in our environment. So a lot of glyphosate, which is an organophosphate, it's a glycine amino acid synthesized version, so it doesn't act quite the same in the body, but it does borrow energy, which is important to know. And there are two acid groups. You can see there a phosphate acid and carboxylic acid, and it's importantly it's water soluble, and of course we are 70 to 80% water, so that means it works within us, and you know it's held in water. Now, just to give you a bit of context, glycine is actually an amino acid that we build from threonine and serine when we get those from different foods, and I'll show you those a bit later. But these glycine is important for muscle formation and retaining muscle formation. So think of some of the degenerative diseases where people lose, you know, muscle strength, and it's also really important for RNA and DNA synthesis. Glycine, the glycine amino acids in the human body, these are our coding. They're our what are called codon amino acids, and they're really important because they, when our nucleus releases a blueprint of its genetic code, so the helix that we've seen, that everybody's probably familiar with, that's an RNA blueprint, and that's released out to a small factory called the ribosome in the cell. So that happens in every cell, and it's happening all the time. All of your cells now are magically creating this beautiful blueprint of your DNA, and what's happening is the RNA is grabbing lots of amino acids from around the cell, and there are different types of RNA. So you've got coding RNA, you have decoding RNA. So they all have these very specific, wonderful jobs, and as your blueprint comes out, they stick different amino acids on there, different proteins, and get it looking good so that it's ready and finalized as a final RNA that's ready to create a new cell. So what's really important when we look at things like a synthetic glycine amino acid is that well, there's a study was done in Germany by Dr. Stefan Franz. He was the pathobiologist research lead. And what they did was they did some research on these glyphosates, these organophosphates, and they noted that, you know, when a cell is trying to form its protein, so in that RNA ribosome engine, it will grab glyphosate instead of glycine, and it will form a damaged misfolded protein, which then goes on to replicate. And their exact terminology was that, you know, after that, it's medical chaos, and that glyphosate replaces this glycine. The cell can't conduct its business as usual, and it can cause unprecedented consequences in many diseases. So I think, you know, it's kind of quite easy to see how that could happen, and it's just really critical and key that we, that, you know, you eat the cleanest food you can, you get your enzymes, vital amines, minerals, essential fatty acids from good sources, and it's important that we, you know, take a role in our environment and try and make sure that these organophosphates are really limited, and that we try not to ingest too much of them, because they pull apart these essential, these peptide barrier cells, and they create this. So for instance, in the gut, you get leaky gut. Once this happens, you get the cells become really small, and then they can become fibroblastic and metastasize, and that's, you know, potentially somehow, you know, cancers can happen from these effects. So so it's a really critical key, and we'll come on to a bit more of that a bit later. But so, you know, how do we get our enzymes, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids and other stuff? Well, I've done some it's quite bitty in a minute, but it's really key that we, like I just mentioned, really get this from our, you know, get good amounts of folate, ubiquinone, that we get the medical properties of foods. So one of the things that happens again with these glyphosates is that they, and with antibiotic use, and it's because of their effect on the gut, is that they stop us absorbing folate. They stop us absorbing our coenzyme Q10. They stop us absorbing the wonderful medicinal effects of food. And so, you know, we really need to take a good look at eating organic and making sure that these medicinal aspects that we really need aren't affected. And of course, we all know the basic structure of the digestive system. So obviously, amylase is released in the mouth. You chew, you masticate, you swallow, and so really the first interaction with food is that it hits the stomach, and it meets hydrochloric acid, an intrinsic factor from the cells in our stomach lining, and then it goes on to be broken down by digestive enzymes, and bile salts join the party. And so the building blocks of our bodies are liberated from food because we have digestive enzymes. Now in Denmark, the Aarhus University showed that glyphosate and antibiotics inhibit the cytochrome P450 enzyme pathway, and that is our main detoxification and conjugation pathway that happens with the chemicals and enzymes in the liver. It's an essential binding chemical route in the liver. And another scientist, Yosiania Salbago, in 2014 did a study and found that digestive enzymes trypsin, amylase and chymotrypsin were significantly affected by glyphosate. So where our essential elements are broken down with the energy and the enzyme catalytic activity in our stomachs, then, and our right throughout our gut, then you know, we need to make sure that we're protecting those areas. And we can see here the various different aspects of digestion. So your proteins degrade into peptides and amino acids with trypsin and chymotrypsin, essentially cleave these into smaller proteins, and carboxypeptides breaks down one amino acid at a time. Aminopeptidase into free amino acids for absorption. Fats are cleaved by lipase into glycerol, monoglycerides, triglycerides, and the bile salts emulsify and break down the fats for absorption. Carbs are broken down with the amylase, maltase, and lactase into monosaccharides, oligosaccharides, and intestinal bacteria also break these down too. So we can take a bit of a closer look now at where the different vitamins and minerals are absorbed. So those of you who are new to nutrition, you know, you may find this helpful. I always found this quite helpful. It's always good to look because you can't remember everything. So you can see here that now this has moved a little bit. I think but basically we're looking at the vital amines or vitamins here. So we can see that C, the B12, D, etc. They're broken down in the ileum, and you'll see that the different, I'm just going to move my webinar box out of the way, sorry. Different vitamins are broken down in different areas. We've got the jejunum, etc. And we can see the roles that some of these vital amines play. And so we'll just go through to minerals. So we can see now where our minerals are absorbed, that a lot of the minerals are absorbed in the duodenum. So of course, if there's any issue with any functionality in any of these areas, you know, we're going to struggle to get our necessary building blocks for creating new DNA, new RNA, for propelling life into our body, because our body is that clever. It literally takes everything from the environment, breaks it down into its core essential elements, and rebuilds stuff for us. I mean, how amazing is that? It's just fantastic. So then we go into our amino acids. So these are absolutely essential. So you see here, some of these are coding amino acids. So some code, some decode, some transfer amino acids from different RNA molecules into our coding molecule. And so they have such a huge amount of, you know, scope and role within our body. And it's crucial that we keep them, you know, keep them available within us, and that we don't replace them with false versions, essentially. So here's more of the amino acids, and then essential fatty acids, and these create fatty platforms in our neural messaging. So these are really key. They're important for hormones, prostaglandins, you know, vasculature again. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, and they should be in a 1-to-1 ratio in your body. Okay, so just going back to our components of RNA, which are, you know, our building blocks of life. I've mentioned these messenger RNA and transferal RNA, and you can see that so the code comes out of our nucleus, and it basically comes down to the ribosomal area, where it gets more RNA, and there are lots of bits of ribosome that float in, and they go through, there's 3 distinct protein receptor areas within this ribosomal RNA that take from the other RNA molecules that float around in the ribosome, and they basically attach the right amino acids to the new RNA code. And then you have other aspects which stop the coding. So our amino acids are just absolutely vitally important. And, you know, we need our digestion intact to be able to get these. So, yeah, absolutely key.
It's quite critical, isn't it? I was just going to make mention that one of the questions we've gotten is, so once we transition to, I mean, you spoke of the value and the importance of making sure that we're eating clean, or as clean as possible, right? Organic fruits and vegetables and things. But once you transition to eating that way, how do you help clean out your system so that it can help regenerate? What would you suggest to that, Leonie?
Great question. That's a fantastic question. Well, I take everybody case by case. So different people will have, call it genetic predisposition to have a weakness in a certain area. So somebody with Parkinson's, their blood-brain barrier has suffered, or maybe the kidney where the dopamine is produced. Everybody is an individual case, but there are some key kind of basic fundamentals. And I think with most people have been exposed to pretty much the same epigenetics. We've all got, you know, mobile phones. We've all, you know, most of us have vaccinations. Most of us have been exposed to organophosphates in some degree or another, whether we're walking down in a nice country walk and it's been sprayed in the fields, or whether we've eaten it through our diet. A lot of us would have some sort of dental work because it's difficult not to. You know, a lot of us will eat sugar, which turns on aging genes. A lot of us will have different chemicals that we'll use in the home. And I mean, everything you make, from the cup you drink from to the paint on your walls, you know, there are epigenetic stimulants there. So as a herbal medicine practitioner and nutritional therapist, there are some key things you can do. You can make sure you have good broad spectrum amino acids from great food sources, as I showed in the amino acid slides. You can make sure that you detoxify, and the best way to detoxify is to increase your glutathione. Glutathione you can take in 2 ways. So one is the most amazing herb that I've ever come across. Well, I mean, I love all my herbs, so if you got me on another webinar, I'd probably talk about that as well. But one of them is milk thistle. Milk thistle increases glutathione in the body, and it's our body's natural detoxification factor. It's very powerful, and a good organic milk thistle herb, get from a good source so you know that they're replanting, that it's not from some, you know, perhaps more commercial company that's spraying the crop. You definitely don't want any spray on it. It needs to be organic. A good tincture of milk thistle or a good powdered milk thistle is absolutely fabulous. Milk thistle is hepatoprotective. In clinical trials, it's been shown to reverse some aspects of cirrhosis. It's the only product that is actually injected if somebody has the avenging angel death cap mushroom, and can actually possibly save somebody. So like with any herbal medicine, always speak to a herbal practitioner first, or do some really, really good research. And always start off with, you know, if you do go out and get any, try a tiny bit first, because anybody can have sensitivity to anything, but milk thistle is absolutely amazing at increasing glutathione, cleansing the liver, and just being a generally excellent detox herb. The other thing you can do is chlorella and spirulina are well known, and there's some research to suggest that they can bind heavy metals. So you can use those to bind heavy metals out of your body. The other thing is immunity is quite important. So getting the immunity going. So echinacea is a fabulous herb again as well. And echinacea has been shown to reduce candida by about 40% in certain trials. It's also been shown to preserve the microbiome so it doesn't attack our friendly bacteria. It's also been shown to be quite safe over long-term use, and it has like a multifaceted benefit on the immune system. So herbs are great because they tend to normalize. Now, of course, any herb can be toxic in the wrong dose, but if you get it in the right dose, they will normalize the physiology. And that's ultimately what you're after. You want the body's immune system to wake back up. You want it to recognize false proteins. You want it to macrophage them. You want your macrophages, like Pac-Man, to come in and gobble them up and break down their genetic code and send them out for detoxification, ultimately through the kidney, where you can just get rid of them. So you want, you do need to tackle immunity as well. And I would suggest for getting rid of these, you know, these sorts of environmental poisons as such, or these epigenetics, milk thistle great for general liver detoxification. Echinacea great for blood and general waking up the immune system, so it recognizes it needs to look after you. There's also adaptogenic herbs, so some of the ginseng families can be highly effective at just, so if somebody is just maybe a little bit, you know, immunity's not working, they've got a few kind of secondary infections, like maybe a bit of athlete's foot or fungal stuff going on, you need to just kickstart that, you know, that the immunity. But also a good adaptogen can help, because often our immunity's fallen a bit asleep because we've got too much testosterone, you know, we've got too much stress in our lives, and our body just can't take it, it can't break it down, you know, and it affects the thyroid and affects the adrenals, and then our immunity suffers. And so a good adaptogen can be really, really helpful, and there's several out there. You know, you've got ashwagandha, withania, panax ginseng, Siberian ginseng. I would say Siberian ginseng's a very good kind of gentle one. Panax ginseng, it can affect blood pressure in the first few days, and it can kind of be a bit like ping. So you might want to be a little bit careful with that one. Again, speak to a good herbal medicine practitioner, or you know, just do some great research.
And
if you're
I love that. Yeah. That suggestion, Leonie. I sit here and go, I mean, the amount of information that you have and you know and you've learned through the years, it's like incredibly apparent. So I think that's a great suggestion, is actually reaching out to a practitioner that knows and understands these these different elements. There was an additional question of, so for the immune system, is beta-glucan, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but is that suggested for the immune system?
Beta-glucan, you know, there's a little bit of research around that. I'm not familiar with the latest, to be fair. So that's probably a question I'd like to get back to somebody on, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then there was another question about milk thistle, and we'll just make this a quick one, but milk thistle can reverse cirrhosis. So how do I use milk thistle in that case?
Well, milk thistle has been shown to reduce some of the effects of cirrhosis. So the way you'd use it, the best way would be if somebody had cirrhosis, then you wouldn't really want a standardized tincture because it would be suspended in an alcohol solution. So you'd want to get a good organic powdered version. And then you'd want to make or get some capsules. You could probably get some good organic capsules from Alfred Vogel, maybe. They'll do some good ones, or any good organic provider. I'm just trying to think, because I always make, you know, I make my own because I get the stuff wholesale. And then you want to get a good, so I have like a scoop. So I'd start off with, say, about sort of 5 grams, and then build up to about 15 grams about 3 times a day, and mix that in with water and anything else that, you know, you might want to use with cirrhosis. You might want to be using some antioxidants and some good vitamins and minerals just to help that client or patient get better.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Those are great answers to those questions. Thank you. So this is where it gets really interesting to me, is now kind of wrapping in the emotional aspect into all that we've talked about when we talk about the overall wellness of an individual. Like, what is the role now that you see that emotions play into all this?
Well, quite. Let's take a look. So,
yes.
so there's so many different things to consider as a practitioner, and it's really hard to kind of know, well, how do I piece all this stuff together? And I think, you know, it really happens that so, you know, there's some key things. So all of your epigenetic factors, you've got to kind of, you got to work to manage those in your clients or your patients. But there's also, you know, the emotional aspect, and there's a whole number. So the book that we're going to give away today is by Carolyn Myss. There's also another really good book by Candice Pert, and she did a lot of work. She found you know, some of the really she mapped some of the neuropeptides in the 80s, and she was pivotal in doing that. I think sadly she's dead now, but basically she found that that the immune system was basically programmed by the brain, and that and she did a whole load of research on this, and that neuropeptides signal cancer cells via their receptors for growth and for how they spread throughout the body, basically, we can see, I mean, you can see on this that there are links between our nutrients, our neurotransmitters and our peptides, and emotions. And so she was suggesting that we can program ourselves better, or we can program ourselves ill. And I know that there's been some research, a lot of research in the UK over negative language given to children, and particularly teenagers who have like just this mass cascade of hormones going on, and they, you know, they have a real need for lots of proteins and protein building blocks. And what they've shown is that that negative words can actually create illness in teenagers, and so there's some really interesting research around that. And I think a lot of people know, you know, it's like somebody says something really bad to you, you just feel it in your gut, you feel really horrible. That's why I love working with Americans, because you guys are always so positive and fabulous at that, so you always feel great working with American people. But
and we feel that way about you, Leonie. You can sense it through the webinar. You're awesome.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, Candice Pert's work is a bit of a a building block for the work of Carolyn Myss as well. So there's all these other ways of looking at the emotional side and the energy side. We've kind of gone through how atoms make molecules, make cells, and that, you know, we need these tight amino acid chains that are holding all together and holding our integrity. But also, when it comes to, when we saw the synapse back along in this particular presentation, I mentioned the Ligan-gated channels that act as gates for our cells, and emotions and too many stressful emotions, too many adrenal hormones which come from stressful environments. These can really affect those Ligan-gated channels and our cellular function. So they can make the receptor site sloppy, so that mimicking synthetic chemicals can get into our, for instance, our dendrites and our neurons, and they can carry information throughout our body. So it's really important that that we look at that, and you know, that we understand that in order to support you know, negative emotions, we need to look not only at the functional side, the vitamin B5, the B1, the B2, and all the vitamins and minerals, but that we also work with the emotional side with people, and that the emotions are, you know, work systemically, and that molecules of emotion can be programmed, as Dr. Candace Pert says. We can see here another representation of emotions, the teeth that may be affected, and the meridians. And there are all sorts of wonderful links. So anybody who's got a ZYTO will know these. Will see these wonderful links between the different scans. And you can pick up sometimes that, you know, if there's a spleen-pancreas imbalance, that anxiety and self-punishment is happening. You can also pick up with things like, the book has Anatomy of the Spirit and Why People Don't Heal and How They Can, from Dr. Carolyn Myss. Now she's an amazing practitioner, but she's a psycho-spiritual practitioner. But she's found in her work, and she's worked for years. She started off as a Catholic priest, so she links the chakras, the Hinduist beliefs, the Catholic beliefs, and the sacraments. So she links like chakra 1 to the sacraments and the sacrament of tribe. So chakra 1 is all about your birth into life. How were you welcomed into the world? Was it an abusive environment? Did you have a mum and a dad, or just a mum? Were your grandparents nice to you? Was your community nice to you? What language did you hear that programmed your body to create wellness or you know, a dis-ease with your environment? And so she's linked and found in her experience, she's got years and years of case studies and anecdotal cases, and it's absolutely fascinating. So she basically kind of gives us that emotional link, so that emotional and energetic physiology. So how the negative language over years of abuse, from being born into a maybe a family that didn't want you, or just one parent who was struggling in life, and how that turns into, so from all of those neuropeptides and all of those you know, sloppy Ligan channels, how that turns into like a dis-ease with life, and what possible links there may be with physical issues. So she links the chakra 1 emotions. They're all about safety and security. So if your safety and security was challenged, you know, that could affect maybe the messaging around your immunity, that safety and security would create informational issues within chakra 1 to do with the physical areas of bones or prostate. And then chakra 2 emotions, blame, guilt, money, power, sex, and how you manage those different areas of your life. And so she links those to sex organs, the pelvis, the bladder, and the mid to lower glands in the abdominal area. And you can see as you go on, there's chakra 3, you know, right up to chakra 7. And so what she does is she gives a very, very strong and very good view of how emotional energy can manifest as a disease within the body. And I think that probably brings us to last minute wellness tips.
I love it.
So
Bring it home, because this is the stuff I love and I need help with.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So, you know, get outside, walk and talk with your friends, suck up that environment. You know, nature has so many healing, beautiful properties, and it's just fabulous. You know, good water, get a good water filter, an alkalizing water filter. Keep your body alkalized. We know that, you know, cancer tends to flourish more in an acidic environment. If you can grow your own food, grow your own grub. That's what we call it. It's a slang word for food in the United Kingdom. Try and buy organic. I know it's expensive sometimes for people, but try and advise your clients, you know, because this is your health. And you saw what happens with the glyphosate molecule and how it mimics glycine and therefore gives us a false RNA envelope, which then creates a diseased or ill at ease DNA. And look at psychospiritual maturation. Look at where your blockages might be. You know, have you had issues with with your family of birth? You know, have your clients had issues with their family of birth? I know I've had people, you know, a lot of guys who have father problems, where they've just had a really abusive father environment or complete neglect. Prostate straight away shows up, and depression as well can tend to show up with that area. Bioenergetic screening, you know, these are ZYTO technology. I mean, I've worked with a number of different systems, but I have to say it's just absolutely astonishing what you can do in helping to create a wellness picture with a very comprehensive bioenergetic screening system. And the great thing with ZYTO is you can build your own biosurveys. You know, if you think everything's all about liver, build a biosurvey around it in that product. You know, it's really quite helpful in alongside your functional medicine questionnaires and your other approaches. Homeopathic detox. I found energetic and homeopathic detox. I'm working with the emotions. So I do actually use the Evox as well. And that's another ZYTO technology. Absolutely transformative, sometimes like that. You know, it really is quite clever. But there's other ways as well, you know. So if you know, you work with emotions, that's great. Homeopathic detox, energetic detox, any energetic work, whether it be Tibetan singing bowls, whether it be Reiki, you know, amazing. I've also seen, I've seen in Royal Cornwall Hospital, I've seen a consultant oncologist bring up a diagnostic of cancer in the colon that was brought about by a Reiki practitioner, and he was blown away by it. Amazing. Amalgam fillings are sadly one of our modern day realities, so yeah, try not to have those. Probiotics, Dr. Zach Bush, he's done loads of work on this glyphosate stuff and how, you know, the gut lining, really worth looking at his products. Fermented foods daily, you know, there's kombucha, there's kefir, there's all sorts of different, that's really great. As I mentioned, milk thistle, echinacea purpurea, organic ginseng, and, you know, work to keep your environment clean so that you're not being exposed to these epigenetic factors that turn on your unhappy genes. And I think that's probably it. At this stage, I'd be happy to answer any further questions if we've time, Jeff.
You know what? We let me pull up and see. We've gotten a ton, and I think one of the things that I think what we'll do is we're gathering up the remaining kind of questions and putting them out into a document for you, Leonie, and then we'll get your response and we'll distribute those out to all the viewers and registrants of today's webinar.
That's great.
So I just thank you so much. I hope that we all found like these little golden nuggets. It was just such an awesome presentation. The more I get into this community and the more opportunities I have in interacting with practitioners and like-minded people, the more I realize that it's ultimately supporting how can we best support the body to heal itself, right? And it's providing the right environment. It's making sure that, you know, how do the emotions play? There's so many of these different elements that ultimately impact how we feel, and I just thank you so much. ZYTO has kind of a unique approach to, and we're going to start distributing more materials here in the coming months, but we kind of have these three lenses that we look through when you come and you utilize the ZYTO technology. The first being we look at it through an energetic lens. We also look through it at an emotional level and then a functional level. And so the value that ZYTO can bring to a practitioner, Leonie alluded to this, is ultimately being able to take some information, understand it quickly, and then with the expertise of a practitioner, be able to help that individual in whatever their challenges of life may be. And that could be emotional distress. It could be the environment that we were born into. And so I just think there are so many awesome things. Thank you, Leonie. If there was a way to clap, we would all be clapping right now. And maybe there is. I don't know. We need to have a clapping machine or something like that. It's great. I want to emphasize the value of this upcoming global conference in October. Please register. That is the number one thing that we hear back. Like, I work in the marketing department here at ZYTO, and almost weekly I hear people asking about this, and so it's such a great opportunity to come together. And Salt Lake City's awesome. I love it. Born and raised in Utah, so I'm a little biased maybe, but if you haven't been here, it's a great opportunity. ZYTO headquarters is just south of Salt Lake City, and so it's a great opportunity to kind of come out here, see us in our element. We oftentimes are out there and all throughout the world, and it would be great to have you come and spend time with us there. Our next ZYTO Wellness webinar will be hosted on May 2nd. At 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We have a great speaker. I'm so excited to have Christine Cronin with us. I met Christine, I believe in October of this last year personally, face-to-face, and she has such an energy about her of wanting to make a difference and a deep impact in this world. She's originally from Switzerland. She's moved over here to Boston, and for the last, I believe, 20 years or so, she's built up a practice in the Boston area here in the United States and has just seen tremendous success in her approach to wellness. She's going to be talking about mindful solutions to address stress and anxiety in our fast-paced culture. That's probably one of the things that we can all relate to. You know, we're always getting pinged by emails or calls or just different agenda items that we're trying to take care of, and she's going to address some of those ideas through what her philosophies are and things. So we're excited to have her join us. So that being said, as soon as this webinar is over, we're going to be sending out a link for registration to this next webinar on May the 2nd. Please feel free to share that. We hope this is valuable time for you. If you have any feedback, please let us know. We would love to have make this a better, more comprehensive experience for you. We hope that the topics and themes that we're talking about are different enough that you feel value of coming each and every time. But without further, prolonging anything, we'd like to thank once again Leonie for your time and your preparation. It was a phenomenal presentation. Thank you everyone for your live attendance, and if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for your time and spending it with us in this last hour. And we'll see you on May 2nd. Thanks. Bye.